Hello everyone, we are going to go through today page 156 to 171 of the Lieutenant. And we rejoin after about a week. It's been since the last interaction between Rook and Tagaran. And at that last interaction afterwards, Rook made a list of all of the verb actions he was going to act out to get like the building blocks of the language, because it wasn't just about lists of words, but then like the verbs that go between them. And so he made a plan. He had his notebook, remembering that that's actually William Dawes's actual notebook that Kate Grenville has used as her inspiration. And so it's been a week and he's been quite impatiently waiting. And when they finally arrive, he was a little bit angry because it's been so long, but he is still really excited, which can be seen on 158. At 158, as they arrive, he's saying, good afternoon, I'm so glad to see you. But he really means them, unlike just a formality. And then he meets the natives. There's Tagaran there, and they're looking at his stuff, and he welcomes Tagaran, and there's two young friends that he meets. One of them called Worrigan and one of them called Bonetta. And he writes, Worrigan is a young girl, Bonetta a young native boy. And they're a little, I guess they are surprised by, and then they exclaim at the way the black marks appear on the paper. That's writing. I can imagine if you've never seen writing before, it would seem like some sort of magical thing. And then he starts his vocabulary lesson and he learns the parts of the body, and he goes through all of the parts of the body, arms and legs, and then he starts to act out the words, the verbs. You are eating, I am eating, learning how to conjugate them, page 162 now. So he's analysing the language and working out that it is a conjugated language, so the verb endings change. And then he starts to act out the verbs. So he walks, he drinks, he yawns, sneezes and pinches. And then when he does creep, he was creeping on all fours, they were all staggering with laughter. And Rook collapses on the dirt, laughing uncontrollably at the picture of himself creeping, that he'd given himself a pain in his side. And he's finally learnt how to play the fool and become the child he'd never been in his childhood, in the company of these three children with whom he'd hardly shared a word. And I think there's a nice parallel there with his childhood that we read about in part 1, where he doesn't feel a sense of belonging or connection or acceptance. He stands out. He's very different. And here, as an adult, it's his very difference, the way his brain works, I guess, the way his differences that make him uniquely suited to actually interact with these natives. And so he becomes a child again, perhaps symbolically that he's like a child, has that child's innocence and that child's sense of belonging. And then there comes, page 62, an interaction about a jacket, his jacket. And so Tagaran starts to actually ask, what do you call this? And he now starts teaching her. I just recognize that she also wants to learn. This isn't just a one-way process. It's become a conversation. It's between two ways. And he continues to learn a bit about the language because of the fleas, that not only the verbs are conjugated, but the nouns are conjugated. Those of you that do German will understand the case system. Many other languages around the world. So Finnish and Polish and like lots of our European languages, our Eastern European languages have different cases. So the words change. The endings of the words change depending on where you're using it in a sentence and how you're using it. And there is a beautiful discussion here, a description at the bottom of 163. as he's learning this, it's like Galileo seeing stars that no one has ever seen before. He's learning things no one has ever learnt before from his Western world. And he describes it like a dance between the two of them, or the voices of a fugue. So those are great quotes for you to use when you're describing the initial interactions between the two cultures, or more accurately, the initial interactions between Tagaran and Rook. Of course, the initial interactions between the two cultures were standoffish and almost violent, with the shield and the being split in half. But this is more the initial conversation process. So the voices of the fugue and the dances between the two, like a dance. And then Tagaran acts out putting on the jacket and taking it off, and describes it as bunubaga, which means taking off and putting on a jacket. And so she's teaching him this action, this verb, but it's interesting because he doesn't have a jacket. Jackets don't exist in her culture, but still, they're lively in their interactions, and him trying to teach her through acting out. And she gives him a great compliment at the top of 165, and that is, "You speak well, good mouth." And her praise fills his heart. And she agrees to come back tomorrow, and they joyfully say goodbye. At the top of 166, a juxtaposition here that you might notice. He takes off his shoes and he notices that his feet are really dirty. And the dirt's been caught in there because of the shoes, but he contrasts that, or juxtaposes that, with the toes of the natives, and that they're not dirty. It's like the dust falls off them because they're not trapped by footwear. Now, that not being trapped by footwear could be symbolic of their freedom in their culture. They're not trapped by society or the civilized world, but it also could be a deeper symbolism of the fact that his feet being dirty represents the civilization being dirty, and the relatively undirty, or the clean feet of the natives also symbolizes their innocence. Perhaps Grenville may have intended that. It's certainly something that I noticed here. And that's the end of 166. And there's another starred section, a new section here. It's just a short section of a few pages where Captain Silk visits him after another week, and he learns that Silk is being sent to Rose Hill. And so Silk is going to be in charge of all of the prisoners and the things that are happening at Rose Hill. And Silk's not particularly happy about it because he's going to miss out on all of the things happening at the settlement. He hopes he's not there for too long. But then he says, maybe there'll be an uprising. And he's excited at that prospect of the violence because it's good for his story. So he's excited by the drama of the potential attack by the natives or by even the prisoners. Rook chooses not to tell him about the visit from the natives and the way that they are exploring a conversation between himself and Tagaran. But he chooses not to because he thinks it's private. Perhaps he doesn't want it to be in his book, in Silk's book, or he just wants to protect the privacy of what's happening. But he's also happy that Silk will be away, so he has the privacy of whatever might happen with the natives in the future, I guess. At the bottom of 169, Rook finds out that Lieutenant Gardner is actually being sent to Norfolk Island because apparently it's more fertile, they can plant more things there. Rook's reaction is he's quite surprised. Silk says, "You look as if you've seen a ghost," so he's obviously gone pale. And he then has this, he's like talking to himself, doing some self-talk. And he says, hang on, Gardner, he's a lieutenant in the Navy. His ship is going to Norfolk Island. This is an ordinary thing. It's not a banishment. It's not a punishment. He's like reinforcing to himself, which really links into that theme of the punishments and duty. And the repetition here, it was not a punishment. It was not punishment. You may also call it anaphora. You can call it repetition if you want. It is repetition, but more specifically, anaphora is the type of repetition where you repeat the beginning of the phrase or the sentence, and then what is at the end is changed. I came, I saw, I conquered is an example of that, with the anaphora of I. Anyway, and the beginning, so the end, 171, we read that Rook doesn't plan to keep it secret, but somehow it seems that he intends to keep it in isolation. The interactions he's now having with the natives. So that's all of that section.